And so we're going to start off with the Navbar. We're essentially going to code it the same way that we designed it. So we're going to start with the Navbar and then work our way from there. Okay, now let's look at our Figma file for reference. So we have our navigation bar here with the height of 56, background of level 1 with some icon buttons that are 40 by 40. And then they have an SVG of 24 by 24. So let's start with those icon buttons. We're going to create a components directory, then have an icon button. Now, some people like to have an index in here as well, just so that they can import the icon button like so. But it really doesn't bother me to have an extra icon button in here, so I'm not going to create an index. And also, too, I like to export default function icon button. Some people like to create constants and then export that, but I think it's just a lot quicker to do it this way. All right, and then we're going to have an interface, props, extend react dot HTML props, HTML button element. This is going to have children that are React node. Then we're going to have a should fill. And this is going to be how we're actually going to fill our icons. It's just a little trick that I do instead of importing a totally different SVG just to fill it in. We can fill it in with CSS. And then I'm going to have a class name, which is a string, so that we can extend our styles if we need to. And then we're going to have to return a button. Inside this button, we're going to have children. Let's get our props from here. So we're going to have children, should fill, and class name. All right, so we had a button that had a width of 10, a height of 10. And I just know this because, yeah, with Tailwind, everything's a factor of 4. So 4 times 10 is 40. And so we can double check that if we just go down here. You can see that it's 40 pixels. And then we have our SVG, which is 24. This is a way to say, within this element, there's an SVG. Make sure the width is 24, so 6 times 4 is 24. We're going to do the same for our height. And then we have our should fill. So if we have should fill, then what we want to do is return our SVG anything that's a descendant of that will have a fill of primary text. If we don't have that, then we'll return an empty string. And then we have our class name. And if we have a class name, we'll return that. If not, we'll return an empty string. And we also want to make sure that our icon is centered in there. So let's go here and say flex, item center, justify, center. And then we also want rest. So that way when we pass an on-click or anything that normally goes to a button, we'll get that here. So let's go ahead and do rest here. All right, it looks like we're getting a error, so let me see this. Okay, so we're getting it's not assignable to this type here, detail HTML props. So let's just go ahead and copy this, change this to that. So let's delete this, paste this here, then add these guys. And then okay. Here we have an icon button with our props. We have a children prop, which is how we're going to pass our icon through. We have a should fill prop, which will tell us if we actually should fill in the icon. And then we have a class name prop, which will allow us to send our classes. So maybe you want to change the margin, or maybe you want to change its height or its width. And then here we have our style. So it's a flex, height of 40, width of 40, item center, justify center. We're making our SVGs 24 pixels by 24 pixels. And if we have should fill pass, we're going to pass that we fill everything that's at the center of our SVG with primary text. And then we have our class name here that we'll pass if it's passed. Okay, and then we have that primary text there. And we actually don't have primary text configured in our tailwind. So let's go ahead and do that. First, we're going to make our CSS variables in our global CSS. And again, I already have these picked out for the sake of timing, so let me copy those over. Okay. So here we just have CSS variables where we hold our colors. So we have background level 1, level 2, level 4, level 1 hover, level 2 hover, and then our text colors. Okay, save this. And then we have our tailwind config. And here we're going to extend our colors and then copy this over. Okay, so here we're basically just telling tailwind that anything with background, grab the background CSS variable, same with level 1, level 2, level 4, and so on. Oh, and I should add that in global CSS, I made the background color our var background, and then our actual text color, primary text. And so when you change the tailwind config, we have to restart our Next.js. And so now if we go over to our button, now I can see if we're to type, let's say text, primary text, we have it here. And actually this would have shown regardless if we restarted it, but you do have to restart for it to show on the browser. And so let's just save this. And so now we have our icon button. So let's go ahead and make our navigation bar. All right. Okay, so we're going to export default Navbar function Navbar. Return nav. And it's flex with the items at the end. We're also going to make sure that they're centered. And then it has a height of 56, which is 14 maybe. Let's see. 14. And then has a shadow. Let's just say small. And then it's also fixed at the top of 0. And then the width is full. And if you see how that changed the actual order that we did those, that's the Prettier plugin. Okay, so now we have 3 icon buttons in here. And what you just saw there, that's when you actually export it as a function. At least with NVim, that's what you get. I know in VS Code you don't get that. And so we have 3 icon buttons, and they need a child, which will be a React icon, which we don't have. So let me open up another terminal here. pm add React icons. Okay, let's add that. And then we want the moon here. So let's say IO moon imports IO moon from React icons IO 5. And then we want inside here the IO chat outline. And then we want, this actually isn't a button, this is going to be our avatar. So let's make this IMG image, give it an alt and say avatar image. And we're going to give it a source. This is a little trick I like to do when I want to get a quick little image. I'll just grab one from Faker.js, and I usually just go to play code to do that. So I'll add Faker.js over here. And then I'll import it. And then console log faker.image.avatar. Okay, so let's copy this guy, bring it over, paste it in here. Oops. Okay, and then this guy would be rounded. So rounded full, so it's a circle. And then let's give it a width of 32. Out of 32. Yeah, let's just see what we have right now. Let's go over here. Oh, we actually need to import it too. So let's go to index.ts. Let's delete all this, delete this, delete that. Let's delete this as well. And let's import our Navbar here. Okay. See what we got. All right, so that's our Navbar. We actually went the IO moon outline. And we need some spacing here, so let's do that real quick. Okay. So let's say space X. I believe we had our spacing of 8, and then we need some padding as well. So let's say padding 16. See how that looks. Okay, looks better. And then we need to change this to IO moon outline. Delete this guy. And something's going on here. The spacing looks a little bit different, so let's see what's going on. Well, I guess, yeah, it's because this avatar is only 32 by 32, which we want, but let's actually wrap it in this so everything's uniform. Go back in. And then we're going to give this a width of 40 and a height of 40. Okay, we look a little bit better there. But let's actually center all this. So let's say flex items center, justify center. Okay, that looks better. All right, so now we have our navigation bar with our icons, and now we need to make our conversations. So let's do that real quick. Jump over here and make a new directory. Let's call it controllers. Then inside controllers, we'll have a chat. And inside that, we have our conversations, conversations.tsx. Yeah, that's how I like to do things. So anything that could be reused, I'll put in a components directory. And then for components that are not reusable, and they're more like their own entities, I like to put in controllers because we're not just going to be using conversations everywhere. So having controllers, chats, and then conversations, we can go ahead and say export default function conversations. And then return a div. All right. So what do we have over here? All right, so I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I like to design from desktop to mobile. And then when I code, I like to design from mobile to desktop for a couple of reasons. One is that's kind of how Tailwind is designed. So you have your breakpoints starting at small all the way up to large or extra large. And then two, it's a lot easier to take things away when designing in Figma. And I feel like it's a lot easier to add things on when you're actually coding. So we're kind of going to be jumping between these two guys, because whereas this one's kind of a floating pop-up here, this is actually spanning the whole screen. And this has a chevron icon while this one doesn't. So let's go ahead and start with the actual wrapper. So that's going to have a class name of, first it has a level 1 background, which reminds me that our Navbar needs a level 1 background as well. So let's do that. Background level 1. Okay. And then it's fixed. Then we're going to say top 0, bottom 0, left 0, right 0. This is just so that it's hugging the top, bottom, left, and right, so we can stretch it out for mobile when it's actually on a desktop or an iPad. So we're going to start with medium. We're going to say rounded, I believe large is 12, extra large. Then it's going to have a shadow, so shadow small. We also want the bottom to be unset, so we're going to unset the bottom. We also want left to be unset. And then for top, here it's 20 pixels from the Navbar, which is 56 in height. So we can say 76 pixels for medium. And then we can say for right, it's going to be, it's going to be 16. So right 4. All right, I think we might be okay here. And we also know that it has these 2 items that are in a column. So we can make it a flex column. Let's put that here, flex column. And then it also has padding, which I think is 20. It says 19, should be 20. So let's do padding of 5. Okay. Cool. So now we have our header. So that's going to be a div flex item center justify between, because here we have space between. I know I mentioned this before, but it's cool with auto layout because you kind of think of it as a flex box. So we can look at this and say, okay, it's in a row. The direction is horizontal and we have space between here. And so that looks pretty similar to this. We have a flex, we're centering the items, just like we're centering the items here. You can see how this messages is going to the bottom as we move it. And then it has a space between, which we see here. And then inside that, we have an icon button that is IO chevron back. And then we have messages. And then we have another icon button. That's IO add outline. And then we need to make this guy hidden when it's not on mobile. So we're going to say class name. And this is why we have that class name prop, so we can extend this. And so on mobile, we're going to say hidden. And then this guy needs to be a font size of, I believe it's large, 18. Okay. So that's our header. On mobile, we're going to have a chevron, and then we're going to hide that when the screen size gets bigger. Then we have a messages header, and then we have our add button. So that's what we're seeing here. Okay. Then we have our conversations, and we're just going to make some dummy data here. Constant conversations equals an array. And so we'll do this a little bit later, but essentially our conversations will look like this. We'll have a conversation table, which would have the ID of our conversation. And then we'll have a message table, which has an ID and also has a conversation ID. And then we'll have a conversation user, which would have a user ID and a conversation ID. And so that way, when we're actually looking for what conversations belong to a user, we'll check based off our user ID. So we'll say, like, let's say we have a user ID of 1. We'll say, let's go to conversation user table and see all the conversation users, user roles that have our ID of 1. And then from there, we can actually get those conversations. And then from the conversation, we could see what its messages are. And so in here, we're going to have just an example entry where we have a user ID of 1. And there we can get that conversation from that conversation user entry. And within that, we want its data. So within that conversation, we'll have, let's say the conversation ID is 2, and we want its conversation users. That way we can see, get its participants, and then see which one is our recipient. So let's just make this guy ID 1, because this will be us. Name would be me. And our image would be the image that we got here. So let's just paste that in here. And then we have another user, give him an ID of 3, a name of John Rummy. And then give him an image. We're actually going to copy the same image and just increase this number here. Okay. And let me make this a little bit bigger. And then we need our messages. So we're going to have messages. but we're only going to return the latest message. So we're going to give this guy an ID of 4, say message text equals this is a message. Okay, I believe that's good. I believe that's all we need. All right, so let's go down here and say, from our conversations, we want to map them, get the conversation info, and then we're going to say const recipient equals, so if this conversation info dot conversation users sub 0 equals dot ID equals the conversation info user ID, then we know that's us and we want to return the other user. Else we want to return conversation info conversation users sub 0. Okay. And so basically what that's saying is we're going to check these conversation users. If this first one matches my ID, then I know that the recipient or the person I need to show is actually this person. But if this first one doesn't match my ID, then I know this is the one that I actually want. So if we go back down, then that's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, if this first index of 0 is me, then let's return the index of 1. But if it's not, then we need to return the index of 0. And then we're getting a TypeScript error here saying that the object is possibly undefined. I think it's talking about conversation maybe. Conversation users. We know that's there, so we're going to do that. And now that we have our recipient, we can say that we're going to return. Let's make this a list actually. So this is going to be an unordered list. Okay. In this list, it's going to have a class name and just leave that for now. We're going to have a button. And inside this button, it's going to have class name. It's a flex because this is going to be a clickable item, and it's a flex because these guys are in a row. So it's going to be a flex item center. We're going to say text left because buttons like to center their text, but we actually want this text here to be left. And then we're going to say we have an image as an alt of avatar image, a source of recipient image, and we know that's there. And I know I can use Next has their own little image element, but I don't really feel like setting that up right now to allow it to have this Cloudflare URL. Just being lazy. So we're going to give this class name rounded full since it's a circle. And I believe it's, 48 by 48. So width 12, height 12. Again, that's because 12 times 4 is 48. You can check that here. This is 48. I know that can be confusing because I'm writing 12, but then I'm saying it's 48. And then we have a div that wraps our text here because our texts here are in a column. First text, which will be the recipient's name. We know that that's there. Say class name. Actually, I don't think we need to do anything to this guy. Yep, it's 16 primary text. But then this guy is tertiary text and it's a font of 14. So we're just going to delete U. Oops, what's going on? Caps lock. And then we're going to have the message here. So conversation info, conversation, messages, sub-0. And what is this saying? Number. Oh, yeah, message text. There we go. We want it to be a text of tertiary text. We also want it to be 14, so I think that's small, okay. And I also believe that the space between these guys is 4. So class name space Y2. And then the spacing between these two is 8. So we're going to say space X equals 8. 4. Wait, no, 2. 4 times 2. So let's go ahead and save this. So now we have a list. We're mapping to our conversations. We're finding the recipient. And then we have our list item here, which would actually have a key of our conversation info.conversation ID, which then has a button. Inside that button, we have a flex item center. The space between them is 8. It's text align left. We have an image that's rounded with a width and a height of 48. 12 times 4 is 48. And then we have a div that's a flex column. That's a flex column here. Space between them is 8. Then it has a recipient's name, in this case, John Rumi, and then it has a message here. That's a tertiary text and it's a font of 14. Okay. I think we should be good there. We'll test that out. Okay, so that's our conversations, but we actually need to create a chat TSX because this guy is going to be essentially the controller that displays our conversations or our messages based on if we have a conversation open. So we're going to say export default chat function chat. Okay. And then we're going to return a div for now. And then we're just going to return our conversations. Okay. And then in our Navbar, we actually need to show this. So we'll say const show conversation or show chat equals set show chat equals uState. It's false. Okay, and then we can say if we're showing the chat, then we want to show chat, right? And if we click on this button, the chat outline, unclick, do we want to set the show chat to whatever chat is the opposite of chat. So if it's false, we'll set it true. If it's true, we'll set it to false. And we actually want this to be anonymous function. Okay. I think that's good. If we want to, I think my keyboard's dying, is acting pretty funky. We want to say should fill equals show chat. All right, so basically what we did here is we created this a chat over here, which just returns conversations for now, but later we'll decide if we want to show conversations or if we want to show messages or minimize message. And then in our navbar, we're actually adding logic to our chat outline button that says if we click this, we actually want to show the chat or toggle show the chat. And if show chat is true, then we actually should fill in the icon. And then here's show chat there. So if show chat is true, we're going to show chat. Okay, so now if we go over here, let's see what we have. All right, we have something. So we have our messages plus icon in our chat, but we have a couple issues here. One, it needs a width. We set it to expand when it's in message mode. So we actually can test that too. So it expands when it's in message mode. And it also looks like we need a Z index so it can cover everything. So that's fine, but we need to give it a width and we need to give it a height for the desktop mode. And it also looks like this text didn't get a tertiary text color. So let's figure that out. Okay, so let's go into our conversations. All right, and it needs a width. So let's go here. Give it a width of, I think it's 360 we had in here. Yeah, 360. I don't think they have 360 here. So let's just do, I think 384 is the one that we had to pick. Yeah, so let's just do that 384. Wherever it went. Okay, we're gonna set the width to 384 when it is not mobile. So when it's medium. Okay, yeah, my keyboard just, I need to change these batteries because it's gonna irritate me. So 1 sec. Okay, so we have our width here. And we need to set our height. So what was our height? 402. It's kind of short. Let's make it 540. Okay. So height, 540 pixels. All right. Okay, that looks good. Now we just got to figure out the colors. And I think, yeah, this actually is, it's not the Z index, it actually is covering it. I think that's our colors too. We just need to change the background color. Okay, so let's figure that out. Let's go over to, well, no, we know that the tailwind works because we can actually get our autocomplete. So let's just see what, yeah, so we're getting that here. I just think, yeah, it says that CSS variable is not defined. Yeah, let's go here. Oh yeah, we need to wrap this in a root. Okay. See what that did. Okay, that looks better. So we actually have that separation here, which I didn't even notice before. And then if we do this, okay, we're good there. We probably should set a Z index anyway. Okay, but we're not getting this guy here. And we have that shift there, which I think I know what that is. Okay, so let's go back here. So, oh, we actually didn't save this. So let's save that. See if that fixed. Yeah. Yeah, so when I made that should fill, when I added this, I didn't actually save it. But then we have that shift, and I think that's because here we have this space X here. And so that's essentially setting a left margin, a margin left on the second child onward. And so this chat ends up being a second child. So then now this is getting into our navbar icons, and it has its own margin left. So that's shifting everything over. So that's why when we actually open it, it shifts. So let's actually wrap these two in a div, which kind of makes sense because they're in a way related anyway. So let's do that. Okay. Okay, we're good there. Let's set to Z index. Let's just set it to 50. Oops. What happened? Okay. And I think we need some spacing between these guys. And also I think it would be good to change the color as we hover. So what was our spacing? 18. Let's make that 20. So let's go back to our conversations. Make space Y 5. Okay, that looks good. And then let's change the hover. So get the cursor out the way. We want hover background level 1 hover. Okay, see what that looks like. No, we need some padding at the top. So let's say py equals 2. And let's make rounded corner. So let's say rounded, what is 8 pixels? Large. Okay. Okay, that looks okay. Let's add some spacing here. So let's say, actually in here, I just want a little bit of spacing between this guy and the actual list item. So we're going to say margin X 2. Okay. Okay, that looks good. So now we can open up our conversation, see our conversations, and click on one of these, but nothing happens right now. That's because we don't have our messages. So let's create a messages directory. All right. And then if we look at our messages, we have 2 paths. So we have the path where we actually click on a conversation and see our messages, or we have a new message path where we're creating a new conversation. So we can handle this by saying if the conversation ID is new message, then we will show this path. And if not, then we will show this path here. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go into our chats and then creates a current conversation ID. Set current conversation ID equals use state. That's going to be a string or a null. And then we also want a current recipient. And this is just so we don't have to parse out the recipient every time. In just one sec, I'll show you exactly what I mean. Okay, so we have the image here with John Rumi and then the image here. We actually know who our recipient is once we click on our conversation. So instead of having to look through our conversation users to figure out what to show here, what picture to show here, we can just set that recipient in our state. Same with when we're actually searching a user. Once we click on Jill, we know that she's our recipient. So we can just set the state that way and then start showing our profile image and everything that way. So if we go back, now we're here. We can have this default null, and same with this guy. And this user should be a type that we're getting from Prisma, but because we don't have our models, we'll go ahead and create a type for now. And so our user should have an ID, a username, an image, and a name. Let's just go ahead and export this. Okay, and then we need a function to select our conversation. So say select conversation. This would be a function. And this function will accept a current conversation ID, which will be a string. And then it'll accept our recipient, which will be a user or null. And then we'll set our current conversation ID to that. And then we're going to set our recipient to our recipient. And then we're going to pass this to our conversations. Okay. And then we have to define that here. Interface, props, select conversation. Takes a current conversation ID, string or current recipient, which is going to be a user or null. Return void. And then we can get that here. Okay, and then this user is going to be coming from that user type that we exported from our chat. Okay, so to kind of go over this again, we have a current conversation ID and we have a current recipient. And once we select a conversation, we are going to set our current conversation ID and our current recipient. We're going to pass this function to our conversations. And then so here, now when we press the add button, we can say set or select conversation. The conversation ID will just be new message. And then the recipient would just be null, right? But then here, on click, we're going to be selecting the conversation. And that conversation ID would be conversationinfo.conversation.id. And then that recipient will be recipient. Okay. And this looks like it's complaining because we're passing a number in. And so, yeah, we actually are passing a number here. So let's just surround these with parentheses. Surround them with quotes. Okay. Cool. All right, now what is it complaining about? Oh, that's because it's looking for a username. We'll just say username is me. Username equals John J. Remy. Okay. This condition will always return false since types number and string do not overlap. User ID. Okay. Uh-oh. Must have undid this on accident, so let's just do that again. What else did I undo on accident? Let's go up here. We have our username, we have our image. Okay, what else is this saying? ID name, oh, or undefined. It's not assignable to user or null. So we're just going to say that we actually have this recipient. Why isn't that working? There we go. Okay. All right, so now if we press the add button, we're going to be setting the conversation to new message with no recipient. But then if we actually click on a conversation, we're going to be selecting that conversation and setting it to this conversation ID and the recipient that we get from here. All right. So now that that's in place, we need to now show our messages. So let's just go ahead and export defaults function messages, turn div for now. Save this. Okay. And then for now, we're just going to say if we don't have a conversation ID, then we're going to return that. And if we do, then we're going to return messages. But this won't really work in the long run because we might want to just look through our conversations while we already have messages opening, while we already have our messages open. But for now, we're just going to do it this way. Okay, so let's save that. And then let's go ahead and create a type for our chat state, because we're going to be passing this around a lot. So we're going to have a current conversation ID, which could either be a string or null. We have current recipient, which could be user or null. We have set current conversation ID, which is, I believe it's dispatch sets. Let's see, dispatch set state, I believe it is. Yeah, set state action. Okay, so this is dispatch set state action, and it's either going to be in string or null. Right, and we have set current recipient. It's going to be a dispatch set state action, user or no. Okay. There we go. Okay. So that way, and now when we go to our messages, we can just say its props are the chat state for now. And then from here, we can get to our current recipient, current conversation ID. And we can pass that current recipient current conversation ID. And we're going to need to set the current recipient eventually when we find a user that we want to message. And then let's pass this set current conversation ID. Actually, we don't need that, at least for right now. So let's kind of change this a little bit. We're going to say type props equals omit from chat state. We're going to omit the set current conversation ID. And then that's going to be our props here. Okay. All right, so basically what I just did there, we created a type for our chat state just so that we don't have to redefine what this function is everywhere, because we're just going to be passing this along through our components through messages. So now we just defined it here. So we have our current conversation ID, our current recipient, and then we have our set functions here. And so that way now, as we go through our messages and we create our headers and whatnot, and they're looking for our current recipient and our current conversation ID, we don't have to keep on making our props and then defining this here. We can actually just extend this or omit things from it like how we did right here. So we just omitted the set current conversation ID function from here. All right, so now let's go ahead and start styling this. It's a little bit similar to our conversations in that it expands on mobile. But the only difference is we're not adding on an extra button here. So we can actually, we could look at the conversations, but I'm just do it by hand. So let's say background level 1, it has a shadow, small, and then it's fixed. On mobile, we're actually going to spread it out by making it go to the top and bottom, left and right. Another way to do this, now Tailwind just released a new update. So if we look over at our conversations, we set our top, bottom, left, right here. But then we had to unset them here, right? But now with a new Tailwind update, we can say max, MD, bottom, or top 0, which just means up until our media query for medium, up until medium, we're going to have a top of 0. So that means just for mobile, we're going to have a top of 0, and we can say max, medium, left, 0. So up until medium, we're going to have a left of 0. And then we're going to have a bottom of 0. And then we're going to have a right of 0. So now we're just stretching that out to fill the whole screen. But then on medium, we're going to have a right of 4 and then a bottom of 4. So then here on our medium, it's actually just going to be a little bit to the right. I mean, hugging the right and hugging the bottom versus having to do anything with the left and right. And on our mobile, again, we're just spreading it all the way out. Okay, and then we need our spacing. So if we look here, our spacing between our items here is 20. And so we're going to say space Y 5. And we're also going to make it a flex column. Okay. All right. And so now in here we have our messages header, and we're going to create a component for this just to make it a little bit more organized. So messages header. Okay. Okay. And so now we're going to return that here. Okay. All right. And so for our messages header, if it's a new message, then we're going to have a new message header and then a remove button. But if we actually have a user, then we're going to show that user's avatar, their name, their username, and we're going to show that minimize button and the close button there. So we can say this is a class name flex, and then we're going to have justify between, because there's space between these two here, and there's space between this guy here and our buttons over here. And it's a flex because this is a row. Okay, and then we can say, here we're going to get to our props from here. So we're going to say type props equals omit chat state. And we don't want to set the current conversation ID. We also don't want to set the current recipient, right? But we do want the current recipient and we want the current conversation ID. So now we can say current conversation ID, current recipient. And now we can just say, well, actually, we don't even need the current conversation ID, because we can say, if we don't have a current recipient, because our messages only should be showing if we have a current conversation ID, then we know we want to be showing the new messages, right? Which will be a div. And if we do have a current conversation, then we'll be showing the avatar with the name, right? Okay. Okay, so if we don't have a current recipient, then what we'll be returning is just that messages header, right? And actually, no. What we can do is, let's do this. This will be in the flex. Trying to think this through, because we actually can design it to where we're just going to return a new message, and then we're actually just going to show this minimize button if there is a current recipient. And if there is a current recipient, we're going to return this. So we know for sure that we want to have our buttons here, right? So it's going to be a flex. And then we can say that if we have a current recipient, then we will show that icon button. That's our minimize button. I don't know if it's IO. It might be IO remove. We'll check that in a bit. To IO remove outline. And then, so we will show that if we have a current recipient. But if we don't, regardless if we don't or not, we still want to show that close button. So we're gonna have icon button, IO close outline. And so just a little tip, and when you're actually picking your icons, it's best to have icons from the same provider. What I mean by that, like you don't want to have a couple icons from Font Awesome and then a couple icons from Bootstrap and then a couple icons from, I don't know, GitHub, right? You want to find one of these that have most of the icons that you need, and that way things can look uniform. Because if you start mixing and matching your providers, some of these guys, like some of their actual borders are a little bit thicker and some of their icons are a little bit smaller. So then you're going to be spending time trying to adjust the sizing and whatnot just to make them all look cohesive. So yeah, it's just best to just try to find one that has almost everything you need and stick to that. So I always use Ion a lot, so I kind of know a lot of these by heart. But let's just make sure that that one was the remove, the minimize. Okay, yeah, so we have the IO remove, and I believe it's close, for close. Yeah, okay, we're good. So, all right, so here, we're actually kind of working backwards. This is our flex of our buttons. If we have a current recipient, we're going to be showing the IO remove outline. And then regardless, we're going to be showing that close button there. And then in here, if we don't have a current recipient, that just means we need to show the messages, right? So we're going to have a p tag and just going to say messages or new message. And then I believe it needs to be 18 pixels. Let's double check that. Am I tripping or am I not seeing the actual font size of this guy? Okay, that says 16. Let's see what 18 looks like. I mean, I'm not really telling the difference here. All right, let's just use 18 for now and then see what that looks like on our browser. Okay, so we have our new message there. And if we do have a recipient, then we want to show the avatar and the name. So this would be a flex because we have this guy and then our name and our username. That's in the column. So these two guys are in a row. And then these two guys are in a column. So we're going to have an image here. The source is going to be our current recipient image. The alt is just going to be avatar image, avatar profile image. Okay. And then it's going to be rounded full because it's a circle. And then it's 44 by 44. So width of 11, height of 11, right? Okay. And then we have that other div with our username and our name. So that's going to be a class name, flex column. And so now I know things by default actually stack on top of each other. So in some instances, like it doesn't really matter if you use flex or flex column, but I like to do that because if I were to use spans, for instance, then I wouldn't make it a column. So it helps me know that when I look at this, that these are going to be in a column versus like having two spans in here and it'll actually show up as a row if we didn't use flex column. And there's some other situations where flex actually becomes useful even though it's just in a column. So let's go ahead and have our name here, which would be our recipient, current recipient name, and then we'll have our current recipient's username. All right, and then it's a text 14 and a light tertiary text. So let's go back here. And then tertiary text. Okay, so now what we're looking at, we have this whole div here, right? That's a flex and justify between. So that is this square right here, or this square. So it's this whole div. then it's in a flex, and it says justify between. So it's saying my items have space between them, right? And if we don't have a recipient, then we're just going to return a new message. So that's what we're seeing here. Either we have a recipient and we're going to return new message, or we do have a recipient and we're going to return a flex that has an image inside, which is our avatar, and then it has our name and our username. So this is one group here, this is another group here, and these both are in flex. And so that's what we're showing here. They actually have a space between them of 8, so we can do that here. Space x2. We either can do that, or we can just say margin right 2. Same thing. So that's that. So now we either have our new message or our avatar and our names. And then lastly, we have our buttons over here. So they're grouped together in their own div. That's a flex. And then so if we have a current recipient, then we will show that remove outline, which is our minimize button. And if we do have a recipient, we'll show that. And if we don't, then we'll show our close button here. Okay. And so let's save that. This guy wants our current recipient. And let me go over here. Let's just take you out. Let's say current conversation ID. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and test this out. So if I press the plus button, we get our new message in our button, but we need to set our width and our heights for the medium. So let's go back to our messages. So for medium, instead of it stretching out, we're going to have a width of that 389. I think it was 96 or 384. I'm just going to have the height of 540 pixels. All right, and I think I saw some alignment issues too. We want to make sure that our items are centered here. We want to make sure that our items are centered here. And we want to make sure that our buttons are centered. Although I think this wouldn't really matter because they're the same height. All right, so now we're kind of getting there. Looks like it didn't set our height. Oh, that's why. Need actual height. And we also need it to be rounded. So I think it would probably have helped if I actually looked at this pop-up here. Yeah, but we have rounded corners here, so that's rounded of Excel. All right. Let's see what we got now. Okay, cool. Have our new message, we have our button. And then we also have our padding here, which is 20. So let's set our padding here, P of 5. Okay, now we're good. And since we don't have functionality with this close button here, let's just refresh, click this guy. And so now you can see when we click on a conversation, we're setting that current recipient. So now that's how we're able to get this guy here. And since we have our current recipient, we see our minimize button here. But we press the plus icon to create a new message. Then we get this here. And I actually do like it being a font of 16. So let's go back and get rid of this class name here. Okay, I like that. All right. So now we have our header. Now we need to work with our messages, or better yet, we can just work with this input here and then our messages. So let's do that. Create a new directory. Call it new conversation user inputs. All right. Export default function new conversation user input return div. All right, and our messages will say if our current recipient equals null, then we will show our new conversation user input. Okay. And let's actually try to really focus on our design this time. Try to get in one go. All right, so we have an input here with the padding of 12, vertical padding of 8, height of 40, placeholder with the light quaternary text. Okay, and then later it will show this list here. So that's why we have it in a div right here, so we can have a list. So we're going to make this relative because our list has to be absolute and relative to this div here. Then we have our input, right? And our input is a width of full, height of 40. 4 times 10 is 40. Rounded, it's rounded by 8. Okay, so border radius of 8. Then as a placeholder text, or quaternary, padding, horizontal padding of 12, vertical padding of 2. All right. And then the background color is level 2. Okay. I think we might be okay there, hopefully. And then we have that list, right? But let me just make sure this looks fine. And we'll start creating our list. So here, if we don't have a current user, we should have that input. Looks good. And the placeholder text should be user. So let's say placeholder user, right? Or was it search user? Yeah, search user. Let's go here, search user. Okay. Okay. Now, we're going to have a list, but we're only going to show the list if we're actually searching a user. Because we're also going to have a text area and other inputs too. We're just going to create a hooks so we can reuse it. So I'm going to say values, value, handle change. Let's just say use form on change. Or let's just say use on change. That's going to be the name of our hook. So we're going to create a hooks directory and have use on change. .ts. Let's go go here to hooks, open it up, export default function, use on change. Okay. And then we're going to have our initial values. Initial values. And that's going to be an object that has a key string, value of string. And then we're going to have values, set values, equals use state, initial values. Okay. And then we're going to have our handle change function, which has an event. That event will take a React change event for an HTML input element or an HTML text area element. Right. Okay, and then we're just going to say set values, spread what's already in values. And then we're going to say, what I'm going to do, surround brackets, oops, surround this guy. Okay. And then we're going to say event target name equals event target value. And then we're just going to return values, set values, handle change. Okay, so this is just a hook, so we can reuse this for our text area and other inputs. But essentially, we're going to be taking the value of, and it's going to be an object of our inputs. So like here, it'll say user, and it'll be an empty string for our initial values. And then we have our handle change function, which will take our event and then just set the value based on the target's name. And then we're returning all of these. So values, set values, and handle change. So then that way we can come here and use that hook, give it an initial value, and this would be our user, and it's just going to be an empty string. And then this will be set values. Okay. And from our values, we just want our user. Okay. So now we can give this input a name of user. And we can say its value is user. We're getting that from line 7. And its on-change value is handle change. All right, let's make sure this is working. All right, let's go ahead and turn off that outline. Say outline none. All right. And so we need actual search results. That way when we're actually typing names, we can start filtering the users based on what we type. So let's create an array for users to have some dummy data. And let's just go ahead and steal that from here. Okay. Let's just make this that. All right. And then we'll have a search results, set search results equals use state. and that will be type of users. Okay. And so then we need a function to actually search these users. So let's just say fetch users equals this function. If we don't have a user, so if there's nothing typed in our input, we're just going to set search results to an empty array and return. But if we do have a user, then we're going to set search results to be, we're going to filter our user. So users filter, we're going to have a user entry, and then we're only going to return the users that either have a name, to lowercase, that includes the name that we're typing in, the username that we're typing in. So user, or their username includes the user value that we're typing in. And I'm using two lowercase because, with includes, if we had a uppercase J, it's not the same as a lowercase j. So I'm just making everything lowercase so we can get all the results. And then we actually need to call this function. So let's say use effect when user changes. That's our user text. We're going to fetch users. And we also want to kind of add a delay on this. Like when you have a user typing, you don't want to constantly search from the server every keystroke. We would actually want to have a delay. So let's create a timer. And let's set this to the result type of set timeout. Oops. Okay, that's just going to bug me until we actually call it. So let's say set timeout. We're going to call fetch users. And we're going to call it with the delay of 200. And then we're going to clear timeout timer. Okay. It's not result type, it's return type. There we go. Okay. All right. So now we can say if we have search results, then we want to return an unordered list that we would then map through our search results. And this would be user entry, right? And in here we'll return an li. Okay, so let's style this. Okay, so basically it's going to be 12 pixels from our input with the full padding of 12, horizontal padding of 12. And then these items have a space between of 8. Okay. So this guy actually going to be absolute. left 0, right 0. So that way it spans the whole input, and then has a top, and it's 12 pixels from the input. So we're going to say calc 100% of the input plus 12 pixels. And then we have our padding for our list item. Oh, and it's the background level of 2. So, and then we have our padding for our list item, which is, I believe, 12 all around. And it also has a border radius of 8. That's actually going to be here. So let's say rounded, I think large. Yep. Okay. All right. And inside our list item, this is going to be a button. It's going to have an avatar and then the display name and username. We've done this a couple times. We probably could honestly make this a component itself, but let's just write it out. Right. And we can say class name, margin right 2. And then we have that div that has the name, and then it has the username. Which, if I can remember, has a font of 14 and a text of tertiary. Yep. So like I was saying before, we don't necessarily have to put this in the flex column because these are block elements. They'll just stack on top of each other or create a new line. But this guy does have to be a flex here. Okay. Let's see if this works. So we have a user. Oh, forgot to start our avatar. Besides class name, but besides having a margin of 8, we also have a width of 44, rounded full. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and see, without having the flex column, we actually can have them stack on top of each other just fine. And we also want hovering here. So let's make this, when you hover, the background is going to be level 2 hover. Right. And then our hover, it's actually boxy there. So we want to set a border radius on this guy as well, but only if it's at the top or the bottom. So let's say if you're the first child, then you're going to be rounded top large. And if you're the last child, you're going to be rounded bottom large. Right. And so that way, since it's at the top, then we see we're getting those rounded edges. And then this one's at the bottom, and we're getting those bottom rounded edges. So if I was to add, let's just add another user here. Copy this guy. Paste him here, and let's just say this guy was, let's say, jam. So since jam is in the middle, it's just boxy. There's no border radius. But since Jill is at the top, we see the rounded top. John's at the bottom, we see the rounded bottom. And now if we just type A, we get jam. Type O, we get John. And if we type I, we get Jill. Okay, so all we need to do now is just make it clickable. And let's also turn off the autocomplete. So let's say autocomplete goes off. Okay. So we're going to make this wrapped in a button. Right. And then we're going to say on click equals set current recipient to the user entry. Right. And we actually need to pass that in our props. We're going to say type props equals pick chat state set current recipient. All right. And then we're going to say set current recipient from props. And then we're going to pass that here. So we're going to say set current recipient, set current recipient. Okay. So now if we type Jill, we need to actually make it a flex. Okay. Oops. So this is going to be a flex. Say text left. And I did text left because sometimes the button will center our text. So let's just take it out to see what I mean. Yeah, see, so you can see on there, we have that center text. So let's just go ahead and have text left. So we can make sure all our text is left aligned. And it's clickable, but we can see that it's only clickable over here. And that's because our button doesn't span the whole width. And we also have that padding on our list item. So we can't even click over here. So let's just move this padding here. Oops. So P3. All right. And then we still want it to span the whole list item. So we're going to say width full. Okay. That way we can click anywhere in here. All right, so we have that. We can search now. Search for a user. Click on that user, it becomes the current recipient. And I think we also had the button in conversations. And did we do that there? No, we didn't. So let's delete this guy. Give the padding here. And then say width full. Okay. Just some cleanup. Let's create our messages section now. So let's create a new directory. Okay. All right. Let's actually close some of these. Okay. And so for our messages, we have a little timestamp here, and then we have a message from our recipient on the left with the avatar, and then our message here. Okay. All right, so we need some dummy data. So we're going to say const messages equals, it's going to be our message ID. Let's just say 1. Then we have message text. Let's just say hi. Then we have the user ID. Let's just say 3. And then we have the created at. Let's just say new date. And then we're just going to copy that. Paste it here. Change this to hello. ID 2. Say user ID 1. So we're going to return an unordered list. We know that this list is actually going to fill as much space as it can. So let's say class name height full. And let's say flex column. And I'm making this a column because our lists are pretty much in a column here, stacked on top of each other. And then we're going to map our messages, right? So we're going to say messages. And we're going to return this item. Okay, so one thing we need is this timestamp here. And we're only going to show this timestamp if it's a new day. And then we're going to show the time of day in our messages. So we need a way to get this timestamp. So let's just create a function that says get timestamp. Actually, you want it inside here. Const get timestamp. And we're going to pass it our messages. Let's just say type. Let's call it messages. Say type of messages. And we're going to pass it an index, which I'll explain in just a sec. So I'm just going to say timestamp equals get timestamp. We're going to pass our messages. We're going to pass it our index. Let's rename this to message. So the reason why we're passing the index here is because if we're the first message, then we just want to show this timestamp here. That just means we're like the first day or like we're the next day, right? But then as we go through more messages, we want to check and say, is the day before me a previous day? So like if we're on the 12th here, is this the 11th? And if it is the 11th, then we'll show a timestamp right above. And so one way we can do that, we can say const current day or date equals messages subindex dot created at, right? And we know this is going to be there. And then we can say const if index does not equal 0, then we do have a previous, right? Or actually, no, let's do this. If const previous date equals index does not equal 0. So if it doesn't equal 0, then it will be messages index -1 created at. But if it does equal 0, then it's going to be null. And then here we can just say, if we have a previous date, then we want to check if this previous date is a different date than our current date. And so how do we do that? Essentially, you want to say, does this have the same day, the year, and month? Because we can have the same month and it will obviously be, it could be the same day or a different date. We can have the same day, so we can have the 12th, right? February, but that's not the same as the 12th of March. So we actually just want to check all of them. So we're going to say if current previous dates dot get dates equals current dates dot get dates and previous dates dot get month equals previous dates dot current dates dot get month and previous dates dot get full year equals current dates dot get full year. Okay. So if it has the same day, the same month, the same year, then we know this is the same day. So we just want to return null here. We don't need a timestamp. And yeah, make sure you use get date instead of get day, because get day actually gets the day of the week, right? Gets day of the week. What you actually want is get date, which returns the day of the month. Okay. Kind of confusing, but just FYI. And so now if we're here, then we know it's not the same day, or it just might be the first message that we have. Then we want to return a new INTL. I think it's internationalization namespace. We want to have a date time format. And we don't need, I believe that's the, locale. Don't need that. But we do need the month, right? So we're going to say month. We need the long, because we want to say like October or March. We need the day. We need that numeric. And we want the year. We want that numeric as well. Then we're going to format the current day. So basically we're saying, if this current date right here is a different day than the previous date, then we actually want to print out this current date here. We want to print out the month, the day, and the year, right? So that's where we're going to return to this timestamp here. And if we have a timestamp and timestamp does not equal null, right? Then we're going to return our timestamp here. And let's actually look at the styling here. So that's just the text 16, like quaternary text. Okay. So we just need text quaternary, right? And then we need our current recipient, because basically we want to say if this is a message from our current recipient, then we will show this guy, and if it's not, then we'll show our message. So, and what size is this? 28. Okay. So basically, if message dot user ID equals current recipient dot ID. Then we know this is a message from the other user. So we're going to return a div. Do it this way. But if it's not, then it's a message from us. So we're going to do that. And now we need that current recipient prop. I'm going to say type props equals pick from chat state current recipient. Current recipient from props. Okay. All right. So if it's the current recipient, then we want to show the avatar on the message. So this is going to be a flex, right? Then we're going to have the avatar, which will be current recipients. Oops. Let's go back. Source. Let's delete this. Be current recipients image. Alt, let's say avatar profile image. All right. And then it was, I believe it was 28. Rounded full. And this will also be aligned or self-end, right? Because this guy is at the bottom here. So we're aligning it to the end. And then we have our message. It's going to be a div. And okay, it has a padding of 8. We have this message here, which is 16 primary text. And then we have this guy here, which is a tertiary text, and it's a font of 12. All right, and this is right aligned here. Okay, so set background level 2. This has a padding of 8. All right, and then let's say flex column. You don't necessarily have to have flex column. You can have do without flex and then do a float. But we're going to have a column, so we're going to say message text, and then we're going to say message. I'll actually want to have just this time here, right? So what we're going to have is a new INTL date time format. We want the hour, right? We want that to be numeric. And then we want the minutes. Want that to be numeric as well. And then we want to format the message dot created at. Okay. And then this guy is tertiary text. And it's a font of 12. I think that's extra small. And then it's self-end. Okay. All right. Oh, and we need it to be rounded by 12. Okay. So rounded XL. Cool. Okay, I think we're good there. And then in this guy, we just want to show the messages, the message. So we're going to have that message text. Then we're essentially going to have the same thing here. But we want this to be light inverted tertiary text. And we want this guy to be light inverted primary text. And we want the background of this guy to be light primary text. It's going to be light inverted tertiary text. And this guy is going to be text inverted primary text. And this guy is going to be flex column, rounded Excel, P2, background, primary text. Let's go ahead and fix this guy. Okay. All right. We also want this guy aligned to the right. So let's say self end. And then we want this guy to be flex column with full. And that's because when we have a timestamp, these are actually going to be in that list item. So we want these guys to be in a column. And we're making it full so that way we can like align this guy to the right. I think we're good here. We have the flex column here. We're showing a timestamp if we have a timestamp here. Then we have our current recipient's image. One thing we actually might run into is if we don't have an actual correct current recipient ID. So up here, we have an ID of 3. Let's see if we have new conversation. Let's see if we have, yeah, okay. So John Rumi has an ID of 3. So we just have to make sure we're trying to text him. All right, yeah, let's test this out. Messages. So messages section. We're going to pass our current recipient. All right, so let's see what we got. Okay. If we have John. Okay. We look almost there. We need spacing here. We also need spacing here. And spacing there. So just another case of me not actually looking at the design. So the space between here is 20. And then the space between here is 8. So we can do space between, or we can do margin right. Just do margin right. So margin right is 2. And then the space Y between our list items is 20. And then we also need our timestamp to have a margin bottom of 20. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, oh yeah, and then this timestamp needs to be centered. So we're going to say text center. All right, and there you go. So just to go over this again, don't know if this is necessary, but we're basically saying if we have a timestamp, we're going to show that. the way we know if we have a timestamp is if we have our current message and it's a different day than our previous message, then we're going to show it. Or if it's the first message. So if its index happens to be 0, then we're going to return this. And if it happens to be a different day, we're going to return this. Then we're checking here if the user ID of this message is the ID of the current recipient, then we know we have a message from our recipient. So we're going to show that avatar. We're going to show the message and the text with a different background. And it's going to be to the left. But if this is a message from us, then we're just going to show the message with a different background and the time. With the different background, the message is going to be aligned to the right, and the time is going to be aligned to the right, like so. Maybe I need to make this a little bit bigger so we can check our alignments. Okay, and I also want a little bit of spacing between our messages and its time. So let's go down and say, let's just say space Y3, space Y3. Okay, that looks a little bit better. All right, and you know what? I think we have a very long message, and it is very long. Let's see. Yeah, I don't want it spanning all the way over. So let's say down to 25. Let's say for this guy, let's say here we want the max width 60%. See what that does. Okay. And then do the same down here. That way it's not like spanning the whole message, and we actually have a little bit of space here. And we also need to make sure we have, is it white space, pre-line? That way if we have new lines, we actually see those new lines. Okay. All right. And we can check that. Let's try \rn. Yeah, there you go. So now if we took that out, line, we took this out, then it actually wouldn't show that new line. So that's what that's for. Now we're actually getting that new line there. Okay, that's our messages. Let's go ahead and make our text area. Create a messages text area. Text area. Okay. Okay. right, so what do we need with this guy? So we just have our message, placeholder. And if we're actually typing out a message, then we see the icon there. Okay, the height of this is 40. All right. What else we have? Padding. Horizontal padding is 12. Vertical padding is 8. All right, so we have a text area. And we have that icon button, right? Let's go ahead and use our hook. Okay, we're gonna say message, empty string, value. Oh yeah, set value. Set values. Okay. So if we have a message does not equal empty string, then we're going to show our icon button. And I believe that's IO send. All right, so this name, we're going to say message on change is going to be handle change, right? Okay, we know the height is 10. Background is level 2. Padding X is 3 or 12. Padding of Y was 8. Placeholder text was text quaternary, and then the rounding was 8. So quaternary text and then rounded, I believe that's large. Yeah. Okay. All right. We also want resize, none. And then we want width full. Okay. See what that looks like. And we only want to show this when we have a current recipient. So if current recipient does not equal null, then we're going to show our messages text area. All right. See what this looks like? Okay. Looks good. We just need that placeholder. So we'll say placeholder equals, what was it? Message. Okay. I'm not getting that placeholder though. We also don't want that outline. Oh. Not here. We want it here. So placeholder, message. And I also saw that this needs to be in a div. Flex, needs to be in a flex. And we didn't want the outline, so let's just say outline none. Cool. Okay, and I think we need some spacing here. Spacing of 4. So we're just going to say space X 1. Cool. Okay. Cool. Now we have one thing. We actually want this to resize as we write messages, right? And so let's handle that by setting the text area height to nothing and then setting it to a scroll height. And we can do that by using a ref. So let's just say text area ref equals use ref. This is going to be HTML text area elements. It's going to be null. Okay, and then we're going to say use effect. I'm going to say message. So when our message changes, we're going to resize the text area. And here we're going to say resize text area equals function. We're just going to say if text area current. Then we're going to say text area current style height equals nothing. And then we're going to say text area current style height equals text area current scroll height plus pixels. And we're doing that because our scroll height is going to come back as a number. So let's go ahead and test that out. Okay, that's not working. What we got going on? Oh, we need the ref here. All right, there we go. One other thing we need to make this scrollable because now it's overflowing down here. So let's do that. In our messages section, let's say overflow y scroll. Okay, that's good. And we also don't want to get in this big. So let's set a max height. And we're going to say max height. $144 might be good. Let's try that. So let's say instead of setting it to the scroll height, we're going to say max min and take the min out of our scroll height or 144. All right. There we go. And let's also make this button be centered. So let's go down and say item center. Okay. And then one cool thing would be instead of having enter create a new line, we actually can have that send a message. And then we also can make option enter create a new line. Right now it doesn't. And we all obviously have shift enter, which by default creates a new line. So what we can do is we can say, we can have an on key down event. Say constant on key down. So that way this happens before the on change. And inside that we'll have a keyboard event. And so we'll say if event dot key equals enter, and it is not the alt key. We're also not pressing the alt key or the shift key. So if we're pressing either of those, then this is going to be false. What we want to do is prevent the defaults. So we're not going to call that event is not going to go to the onChange. But instead, what we'll do is send a message. And for now, let's just have send message set values message. So for now, we're just going to set the message text to an empty string. And then we can say if event.key equals enter and event.key or event.altKey, right? Then we want to prevent the defaults again. And then we want to set the values to values. Well, in this case, we know it's only message, so let's just say message. And then it's going to be values.message plus our \r \n. Okay. We have onKey down equals onKey down. And we also want the value here to be message, right? Okay, so let's try that. So now if I press enter, it empties out the message. Now if I press shift enter, that's a new line. If I press alt enter or option enter, that's a new line. And then, yep, enter sends a message. Okay, so now I think we just need to make these buttons work. And we also didn't test out the mobile version, so let's just make sure it's responsive. Okay. That looks good. And so just to remind you, it's responsive because here in messages, we have this here, which is saying up until our median breakpoint, we're going to have a top of 0 and the left of 0, a bottom of 0, and then a right of 0. So that way it stretches out the whole screen. But then at our median breakpoint, we have a right of 4, a bottom of 4, a height of 540, and then a width of, I believe it's 384. So now we just need to work on these buttons here. So essentially, yeah, when we click on the minimize button, this should close and we should get a little avatar over here. And then we click the close button, then it should just close completely. So we're going to go ahead and go to chat and create an array for our minimize conversations. So let's put that in the state, and let's say conversation queue. Set conversation queue. State. And what we'll have is an object with the conversation ID and then our recipient. That would be an array. We're going to set this to empty array. All right, so now we need a way to add a convo to the queue. So let's say const add convo to queue. We'll pass a conversation ID and the recipient. Okay. And so here we just want to say set conversation queue. And what we're going to do, we're going to add this object to the beginning of the array. So that way when we map through it, it's going to show at the top. And another way to do this would be to use flex and actually reverse the order, but I'm going to do it this way. So we're going to say conversation ID, recipient, and then we're going to tag on the rest of the queue. Then we need a way to remove it from the queue. So let's say remove from convo queue. And here we just need to pass conversation ID. And then we're going to say set conversation queue to the queue. And it's going to be the queue with that entry filtered out. So we're just going to say convo entry. So we're only going to return any convo entry that doesn't have the past conversation ID. So if this convo entry conversation ID doesn't equal the one that we pass in, then we want to return that. All right. And so now we'll have conversation queue down here. So we're going to say conversation queue if the length is greater than 0, meaning we have something in the queue. Then we want to return an unordered list. And then we're going to say conversation queue.map. It's going to be a convo entry. And inside here, we're going to return a list item, which is going to be a button. All right. And so let's see what this guy actually is, the sizing. So it's 48 by 48. So we have a button that has an image inside. The source is going to be the convo entry recipient image. Alt is going to be avatar profile image. Kind of redundant because the avatar is a profile image, but it's whatever. And then we're going to say a width of 12, height of 12, because 12 times 4 is 48. Then we're going to say rounded full. Okay. All right, and so when we click on this button, when we click on this avatar, we want to set the current conversation ID to that convo entry conversation ID, right? Because now we're basically saying, hey, I want to open up this conversation to this user. So what we're doing here, we're saying, when we click on this guy, we want to set the conversation ID to that conversation ID. We want to set the current recipient to that recipient. And we also want to remove this guy from the conversation queue. So let's remove convo entry, conversation ID. So basically, yeah, we're just saying, when we click on this guy, we want to set this conversation to the current conversation and this recipient to the current recipient. And we also want to remove this guy from the convo queue. So that way, this guy would just get removed and it won't be here anymore. And then for some styling, we want this list to be fixed. We want it to be at the bottom. We're going to say bottom 4, so it's 16 pixels from the bottom. And we're going to say right 4, so it's 16 pixels from the right. Let's just leave that for now. We'll play around with it. And so if this shows up, then we want our messages to move over, right? Because once it shows up, it wants to be here. So we kind of want to move this over a little bit. So the way we can handle that is our messages need to know when there's actually something in queue. So we can just say queue length equals conversation queue.length. We also need a way to add a conversation to the queue. So we're going to say add convo to queue equals add convo to queue. And we need a way to close our messages, which would mean that we need to set our current conversation to null and our current recipient to null. So let's say close messages, and that will be set current conversation ID to null and set current recipient to null. Because right now our message shows up when we have a current conversation ID, but we also don't want a current recipient when we don't have a current conversation ID. So we're going to pass that as well. Close messages equals close messages. All right. Now we just want to define this. So now we have close messages. Then we have add to queue, add to combo queue. And that's going to take conversation ID, string, and it's going to take a recipient to the user. And that user is coming from chat. And then we want, what else did we pass? Queue length. Which is just a number. All right, set queue length, add to convo, close messages. Okay. Actually, since we're going to be using this guy, let's do something like this. We're going to say interface messages. Let's say messages state. Let's put this guy here. And let's also put this guy here. And then we're going to say and messages state. That way I don't have to define it twice. I'm going to export this. Okay. And so we're going to pass add to convo queue here. Here we're going to pass close messages. Then we're going to define that. So we're going to say and messages state. Right. So now we have closed messages. And we have add to convo queue. And now here on click, we're going to say add to convo queue. We want to add the current recipient. And we also want to add the conversation ID, which we're not passing. So let's take this guy out here. Just going to delete current conversation ID. There we go. And we know this is not going to be null because we only show our messages when we have a current conversation ID. All right, and we also need to close our messages when we click this guy. All right. I need to add current conversation ID. Okay, and then we need to account for the queue length. So let's go ahead and add that. Okay, so if we have something in the queue, meaning the queue length will not be 0, then we want to shift over our messages more from the right. So originally it's 0 for mobile and then 4 for medium screens on up. We want to shift it more. So let's say we have 16 pixels. Our avatar, our queue avatar is 16 pixels from the right, and then it itself is 48 pixels. So that's 64 pixels. So we want that to be, let's say 12 pixels more than 64. So that'll be 76, I mean. And we want to do that for medium. Okay. And the reason why I want to do this for medium is because in our mobile, our messages is going to cover everything. And so if we were to shift this over to the right, it will kind of look like this, which is, let me select it. It'll look kind of like this, which we really don't want. So we're going to leave this alone, but we are going to shift a medium on up over to the right. Okay, let's just check chat. What do we have here? Add convo to queue does not exist. Did you mean add to convo queue? Okay. So I guess I called it add to convo queue, which I actually like better. So let's change this. Let's change this guy to add to convo queue. Okay. All right, let's see what we have. All right, so we're here, open it up, minimize it. Okay, we get it shifts over to the left, which is good, but we didn't close our messages here. So let's close our messages. So when we add it to the queue, we're gonna close messages. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay, so that's good. When we minimize it, it closes our messages, puts our avatar here, but we don't really want our conversations to open back up. And it looks like also too, if we're to close this out, we lose our avatar. So I believe we have to tackle this in a couple of steps. So this is happening because in our navigation bar, we have our icon button, which then shows the chat based on if show chat is true. But that would also mean if we were to click on the icon button, then we'll lose our avatar as well because chat controls the avatar. So we lose our state. So instead of having this here, what we can do is move it over to chat so chat can handle it. Meaning as long as our Navbar is up, which it will be, chat will be able to display the conversation queue and then decide if we want to show our messages or our conversations. Right, so let's move this up. That here. Okay. And we're going to say, we don't really want show chats because we're showing chat, but we do want to change that to show conversations because when we're minimizing our messages and then we end up seeing our conversations, that's because that was based on our current conversation ID, which will be null once we close our messages. So instead, we only want to show conversations if we say show conversations. And this will also allow us to, this isn't saved now, but this will also allow us to do this where we want to open up our conversations while we're looking at a message, which we can't do right now. So now that we have show conversations, we can show it regardless of there being a current conversation ID or not. And we just need to change that to this guy. So show conversations. Let's say show conversations and show conversations. Say conversations. Let's change this, paste that. Okay. All right. And let's save this, delete this guy, delete that guy. All right, so now we're always going to show our chat, but we're only going to show our messages if we have a current conversation ID. We're only going to show our conversations if we have show conversations. And then we're only going to show our avatars or our conversation queue if we actually have something in a conversation queue. Meaning that we'll only see this button if we don't have any of that. So now if we go over, this shouldn't be showing. Let's see. Okay, so we only want to show this if show conversations is true. Let's go ahead and save that. Okay, that's good. So now if we open this up, we get both messages and conversations, but we kind of want this to close. That just looks funny having both of them open when you select. So let's say after selecting conversations, we're going to set show conversations to false. Okay. So let's try that again. Click on this, that closes, we get our messages. Click on close, everything's closed. Click on this and I minimize it, it's minimized. And if I press new conversation, search a user, let's just say Jill, minimize this guy. Now we have two here. If I open up John, John disappears here. Jill takes his place. It looks good, I think. I don't know, it looks like the alignment's off down here. Yeah, so even though our button is 48 by 48, this list item has a height of 54, which I think is from the line height. Yeah, so if we set line height to 0, it's fine. If we set it to 1, it's 50. So let's just set our line height to 0. Go over here. I think I just do it here. Leading 0. Try that. Refresh this. Minimize. Search for Jill. Check this out. Okay. All right, that looks good. Okay, and then might want to fix the spacing here. So let's say space Y. Let's say 16. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, maybe too much. Let's say 12. Okay. I think that's fine. Okay, cool. So now we pretty much have what our front end should look like. We can create new conversations. We can minimize messages, close them. We can fake send messages. So now pretty much we just need to go ahead and set up Prisma, write our TRPC logic, and make sure Nextauth is working.